behind the scenes, it was a small group of people that were doing everything.
Welcome back to the GTM podcast. It's your host, Scott Barker.
I want to know how this insane growth actually happened.
Welcome back, everyone, to the GTM podcast. As always, you've got Scott Barker, and appreciate you hanging out with us today to talk about everything go-to-market, scaling companies, sales, marketing, operations, enablement, hiring, product. We talk about it all, and we try and get leaders on who have the live experience and are really going through it and share their stories of what has worked, what hasn't, and get sort of a behind-the-scenes look. We got a great guest today for that. I am joined by Ange McManamon. Ange, welcome.
Thanks, Scott. I'm really excited to be here.
Likewise. We've been trying to get this on the books for a while, and I had just a ridiculous travel schedule recently. So I appreciate your patience, but all good things are worth waiting for. So pumped to hang out with you today. So quickly, just for the listeners, so Ange is a tenured sales leader who really, puts culture first. You've helped build high-performing SaaS teams across all areas of an organization. Currently, you are the VP of Sales at Crunchbase, incredible company, and you lead the high-growth team out of New York City. Previous to that, you were a sales leader for Amazon, Nodal, and Stack Overflow. So super impressive career. What did I miss there?
Yeah, I mean, I think you summed it up very nicely. I think kind of the story with me is that I've been around the block a couple times, but I've also experienced being a sales leader in many different types of companies or industries, and different times of growth, right? Whether it's Series B, Series C, Series D, or a public company. I think that makes me very well-rounded because I've seen so many different types of just scenarios and figuring out the structure of the team, the how we're going to hit the number, and everything that kind of goes along with that. So yeah, so it's been a lot of fun. I mainly more probably lean on the startup person type. I love the thrill of that. But with that, as you know, comes just a lot of hard work, tenacity, blood, sweat, tears, and more tears, right? So yeah, so that's kind of been my career, and it's been really fun. But it's also been really rewarding to be, on your show where I get to share what I've gone through and also listen to, who you've had on your show and see what they've gone through. Because I think without community and without sharing and talking through this big sales leadership role that we live in, we're nothing. I think and kind of doing it together makes it just more realistic and fun.
Totally. Yeah. I feel like leadership in general, sales or otherwise, can feel sometimes isolating or like lonely,
Lonely.
Yeah.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So just hearing other people like, oh, I'm not losing my mind that I'm
I did make an okay decision.
yeah,
Right.
exactly. And it's super interesting that you've had this vast array of experiences across different stages of companies, and I feel like there's kind of two different archetypes of successful leaders, and one is they figure out their niche and they just double down. They're like, I'm a 0 to 5 leader and that's what I do, or I'm a 0 to 1, or I'm a 100 to 500 and then that's all I do, and then they kind of just build a playbook and like repeat it. And then there's this other archetype where they go into different stages and then they collect the bits and pieces that they've learned that work from all of those and apply it to whatever role they're currently in. Both hugely beneficial, but I imagine you pull things that you were doing at a public company that it's like, why don't startups do this? And vice versa, you know?
Right. Yeah. So I'm definitely the latter. I think I'm that archetype that's wanted to experience the different scenarios and different I guess stages of the companies because of what you experience, right? Because of what you go through. It's so different being, that 0 to 10 from the 50 to 100. And but with that said, there are some similarities that you could actually like accelerate on, if you will, right? So it's just, I guess more it's about the learnings and it's about foundationally how you stand as a leader and then how you kind of adjust given what the task is at hand and where you are as a company.
Yeah. Yeah. That big company experience almost allows you to peer into the future. Like, okay, I've seen where, if all goes right, where we kind of get to. So could we build some of the foundation now so it's not as difficult to make the jump when we do, grow up?
Yeah.
Yeah.
It also makes me do things the right way or try to, right? Because at a bigger company, there's so many more processes and structure in place. Just given there's more people, there's more money to be able to build, and with that can become restricting in ways. If I'm not trying to downplay it or make it sound in a negative connotation at all, but I probably learned more of like that's not how I want to build my team. That's not how I want to be a leader. And that's just my experience. That helped me, right? So although I love what you said, like we got to get to that place when you're at that startup. You're trying to get there, but also like, can we get there the right way? And let's not be completely imitating that when we get there. If that makes
Yeah.
sense. Yeah.
It does.
Yeah.
We'll get there, but let's do it a bit
Yeah,
better.
exactly.
Yeah.
Exactly.
Yeah. But I think just as humans, when I look at my personal journey, I think I've probably learned more from seeing what I don't want to do or the leader I don't want to be than the people that I was trying to emulate, you know? It's
100%.
interesting. Yeah. Um, that's great. So one thing I wanted to talk to you about, and we'll just dive right into it. So you've had this incredible career, and one of the things I really appreciate about you is you've taken the time to sort of codify some of your pillars, values, things that you've seen as red threads throughout your career that made you successful and your team successful. And I think more leaders should do that. A lot of leaders just gain great intuition over the years and they rely on that, but taking the time to really sit down and say, okay, what is important for me and what do I feel like is important for broad sales leadership as a whole, I think is really cool. And would love it if you could just share for the listeners kind of your pillars and how you think about building successful teams in the sales profession.
Great. Yeah, I wish I was one of those wing it, just seat of seat of my pants. Like, this is how I am a great leader. No, I need a little bit more structure. And so yeah, I developed these principles or my foundation just to remind myself of who I want to be and how I want to lead. And then expose my team to them to make sure there's transparency and trust. So pretty simple, professionalism, preparation, process, performance, and play. So I can obviously break them all down, but that kind of encompasses everything that I should be thinking about as a strong leader. So if you take professionalism, that's goes without saying, but just y- actually when I thought of these a few years ago, it's probably like 4 or 5 years ago now that I developed them, but I was not remote. And so I was at Notel and it was a lot more in-person sales meetings than we are today, than the world we live in today and we'll continue to live in, right? And so it's a bit different. in person when you're meeting a client and when, we were showcasing space. So like office space. And so just being reminded of, just looking great, right? You're feeling good, looking good, just kind of yeah, I guess just like not forgetting that small thing of, being courteous and just and polite and stuff. And so it started there because I think although that goes without saying, we're all professionals, we're all, trying to be the best salespeople we can be. I think that just like that's kind of the first and foremost, right? Let's just um showcase who we are in the best possible way, whether we are in Zoom or whether we are in person. And I think yeah, so a lot more to think about that one with in person, right? In Zoom, it's kind of easier and although, yeah, I mean, there's not much Zoom etiquette you need, but there is a way of just running the sales call, introductions, right? Everything from that can just sometimes as salespeople, like we just wanna talk, we just wanna get to the good parts, right? We just wanna kinda like push the process forward. So professionalism is like my number one.
Yeah. It's a big one. And I think I would even, push that it is hyper relevant still on Zooms, but I think we can almost fall into the trap that it's not. It's much easier to be like, hey, like, you know, gonna throw on my sweats and I'm just gonna, rock this because it's all good. But like, people upon their first meeting, even if they're not meaning to be judgmental, we're judgmental beings as humans, and we can't help it. So those small things really do matter. Everything from, your background to, showing up, a little bit late, or like like calendar etiquette. Like there's almost this new age of professionalism, right? It's like I would be bad for switching this calendar invite so much for this podcast, but like things like that, it's kind of like the new era of professionalism. And if you do have to switch it, make sure you're sending a note and explaining why and things like that. So yeah, yeah, those are big. I love the fact that they're also all start with P, so they make them easy to
Right, easy to
remember.
remember. Yeah.
Easy to remember. Professionalism, preparation, uh, process, performance, and play. Um, I love those. Talk me through preparation a little bit. This is obviously incredibly important.
For sure. I mean, as salespeople, we need to be prepared for the sales calls. You better read those Salesforce notes from your SDR. You better know what the company does, who you're speaking to, right? Like, how do they make their money? I mean, all the things that we need to have a whether it's a discovery call or whether it's you're presenting a proposal. Like, how do you need to continue to build trust? How do you stay on just on top of your game as far as like they know that they're speaking to somebody that has done their research and is just in the know. And I think that again, I think some people are really good at that with things in sales, like with our job in sales, and I think some people wing it. back to that, and sometimes winging it works, but most of the time it doesn't. Or it just doesn't make the sale really great at some point. So yeah, so I think preparation is key for everything. And that could even go back to the, making sure your Zoom and your audio works and just those little things. Um in prep and giving yourself time to prep for these calls. So that's preparation. It's again, this is not groundbreaking. It's just it's reminders of the things that I think we need to think about it just to stay just on top of our game.
Hmm. Yeah. And there's really just no excuse anymore. Even if you are more of the like wing it type, I got this, maybe you've been in your role for a long time. Preparation has never been easier in history, right? Like the access we have to information, to knowledge is it's just so abundant. You can probably get more information in 5 minutes than you could in 5 months, a decade ago, on a given company, a given person. you can go deep. Like maybe the person you're about to go into a sales call with, maybe they've been on a podcast. Can you listen to that? Maybe they've done a webinar. Maybe they've written a blog post. Like you can consume personal content from these people and like get a sense of who they are, what they stand for, what they're all about. Um, and then, the connectivity piece is big as well. Like for me, a lot of the preparation I will do comes down to seeing like how many mutual connections we know and being like, oh, like why I wonder how they know this person, and then kind of piece it together and be like, oh, they worked at Salesforce when so and so was in there. I bet they worked on this like project. And so you can, build trust very quickly now, due to, you know, largely technology. And like, Crunchbase is a perfect example, right? Like the amount of times I go to Crunchbase when I'm looking at a company, see how much they raise, see their investors, probably do it literally every day, multiple times a day. And it's like, it's right there. Um, that's a big one that is just, I think, unforgivable to miss, and can be sort of the kiss of death if you're not prepared and you've got a type A expert on the phone. Like they'll lose faith so fast. They'll be tuning you out by minute 5 if you're not prepared.
Yeah, you're so right. I mean, nowadays it's brownie points for say, for somebody outbounding me. Um, you can tell right away how much preparation they've done, how much research they've done on me, and it's so easy. I mean, there are so many things that you could find from just podcasts and just like my career. And so if you don't do that, like it's just next, right? It's just next for me. So the personalization and preparation, yeah.
Yeah. It's almost like you're asking me to invest time in you, and you didn't invest any time in me. It feels like an unfair trade right off the get go. Um, okay. So we've got professionalism, we got preparation, process, super, super, super
Right.
important.
It's some sales people's not favorite one. I think process is, um, and when I say that, I say that half jokingly because I think some of the best salespeople I've ever led and I've ever been around, they don't focus so much on process, right? They sometimes focus on just their natural ability, whether it's that rapport building, whether it's that negotiation skills. They are effectively able to kind of run the machine without being like, "Oh, well, this is how I run the machine." But as I've gotten more tenured and later in my career, eh, the the ability to have the process in place and the structure is it's just so important, right? And um, so yeah, I think we at Crunchbase, we have an amazing revenue ops team, so it helps me, figure out where we need to focus on the process and the structure. But as a leader, like that's one of the, top 3 parts of my job is making because that's how the train's running, and then sometimes when, I have a bad month or lower revenue than I've expected, I kinda have to look at the stages in the sale. I have to look like what fell apart aside from us actually not getting that contract signed? Like, what really happened, right? And so 9 times out of 10, it comes back to something was faulty in the process, right? Maybe we didn't document the right, or we didn't do a good job just doing a discovery. We didn't kinda, like, write down all our answers that we got there, or even it started at the qualification process from the SDR and, I'm not being too specific because there are a ton of times where it's like, "Hey, let's just tweak this," right? Like, let's make sure that our solutions engineer is on all of the deals over this amount, and when they're not on that deal, let's look at the win ratio and see, do we need to increase that, right? It's just comes down to kind of managing the team and how we're doing. So a long-winded way of saying process is everything. I'm not overkill on process. Like, I think I do want people to have the ability to run a sales call and be themselves. I don't want them doing checklists and they must get all this information. Again, that's just one part of the sales process. but I want them to have that framework of like, all right, well, I need these 3 things, because we know those 3 things don't let the deal die or help us close our win cycle a little bit quicker, right? So, yeah, process.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Incredibly, incredibly important. And even if you like, it's almost like you follow the process, master the process, and then once you've got that down and you know that, then you can get a little bit like more creative with it, right? Because you know what's coming. I had a leader in the past say something along the lines of, "I'd rather you lose a deal and know why than win a deal and not know why." And it's like, because then if we know, then we can tweak our process and then we can disseminate that new process to the team. Win rates go up overall, and you get enough cycles of that. And then you start winning, and you start winning repeatably instead of just at random, right? Because you don't actually know why you're winning over your competition, if you're not following a process. All right. The final 2 ones, performance and play. Would love for you to break
Yeah.
those
So
down.
performances, this is our job, right? We have a number. We are,
Outcome based, pretty
yeah,
simple.
that's it. It's really about just, not only hitting that number, it's, exceeding that number and, um, you know, being open to this has a little bit of underlining of like, well, if you're not performing, open to being able to like get coached on performing, right? And being able to always help people level up. I think I've said this in the past, but I'm going to make it a sports analogy. I'm not a great golfer, but it sort of reminds me, sales of it's like when you're learning to swing a golf club, or maybe even when you're an expert at it. There's so many things to think about, right? There's the keep your head down, put your hips all the way back. There's just a lot to do in a simple movement. And I think with sales, there are so many different things and parts of it. And we can always get better at something. I don't care if it's my number 1 sales rep and they've crushed it for the last 4 quarters and and yeah, like they're just the top performer. They're always top number 1 on the leaderboard. There is always something that we can get better at in that process and help with performance. So I think it's obviously like performance is number 1. We want to hit those numbers. We want to exceed the numbers, but it's also like having, being able to accept that like when we're not performing, how do we figure out how do we get better? And that's everything.
Mhm. Yeah. I think the golf swing analogy is great. And I know when I try and make tweaks to my golf game, if I'm thinking of 2 things at once, like, okay, I got to remember to do my keep my hips back, and then I also got to keep my head down, then it's like the worst golf game I've ever done. And so also it's about like knowing performance when you are making those tweaks to whatever it may be. Isolate them. Don't try and change everything at once, or you can't figure out, again, what is working and what is not until you've like isolated whether it's a skill set, a tactic, a strategy, whatever it is. And then once you've nailed that, move on to the next little tweak and the next little tweak and the next
That's
little
right.
tweak.
Yeah.
Yeah, yeah. It's a good one. I like that way of thinking about it. Okay, play. Very important. I love this one. I think this is my favorite one of the P's.
Yeah, work hard, play hard, right? Like, you have to have fun in sales. It's such a grind. It takes a lot. It takes a lot of mental health sometimes, right? The highs are highs, the lows are really low. Um, and yeah, I mean, I've seen people in my career that like wanted to be in sales so badly and they just couldn't do the emotional mental thing. And I hear you. It's tough sometimes, but I think having the right mindset and being and knowing, right? Like knowing it is a bit of a ebb and flow, a bit of a roller coaster at time, then you think like, oh, okay, well, if I'm more prepared this low or this high, actually, if I'm more prepared this high, the low's not going to feel so bad, and just having fun with it. I mean, sales, I don't care what you're selling. Like, it could be the most complex technical thing. You gotta have fun, right? Whether you're kind of like building great relationships and being yourself, or just, like celebrating that you're, celebrating that massive contract, your highest contract that you got at that time. And that that to me is everything. That to me makes all the hard work worth it.
Hmm. Yeah, it's huge. Celebrating the big wins are such a big part of that. I think if you have a career in sales long enough, I feel like the lows stay low, but the highs aren't as high, and you kind of which is fucked
Yeah,
up. Like
it's
it's not a
definitely
good it's not a good thing. It's like your highs get less high, but your lows are still just as low. And so you kind of you almost look past it because you're like, okay, this is great, but I need another one. And making sure as leaders or as ICs, you carve out the time, like have almost like a ritual when a big contract comes in, like maybe as a team, as an individual. What are some of the things that you've done on your team to encourage play or encourage people celebrating
Yeah, I
wins?
mean, I think the big shout outs, right? Like right away, as soon as it hits and it's, popping up in the Slack and giving credit. Like, I'm a big fan of obviously shouting out the individual who closed the deal, but I'm also about collaboration and very team focused. So, like, who helped, right? How did the engineer help, right? Did the CSM come in earlier? Did an executive get on the call, right? So I'm a big fan of that. So when you're kind of doing the shout outs, just to make sure, like, hey, it's not an individual sport; it is a team sport in a way. Um, it's Yeah, I mean, we try and have fun, like fun with just giving the shout outs and talking through the deals. Like, I'm a big fan of that. Um, so if we're on a call, making sure somebody speaks up about it, because that's a learning experience. But yeah, it's all kind of done over Slack and Zoom right now, and unless we get in person and we can celebrate it together.
I'm starting to so we got an office at GTM Fund, and everyone's in the office, and I was remote for 8 years, even like pre-COVID era. I think there's going to be a move back to office or pockets. There is something, and I was on the other camp for a long time. There's something about just being around folks that encourages that last P, that like play a little
Maybe a
bit
little bit
more.
more, yeah. So this week we had, the executives were in town. We had a dinner, and right in the middle of dinner, a massive deal hit.
See,
The
that's like
salesperson
that's the
might have planned
best.
it. I mean, I'll give her credit if she did, because she did it. It was impeccable timing, and she might not have, but
Smart. Whoever
it
that is,
was
she's going places. That's like playing
it
chess,
was
not
like
checkers. If she did
brilliant,
that,
Scott. It was
yeah.
brilliant, and I was able to celebrate with my CRO and my CEO and the CFO. Like, everybody was there, and that was just a high fives. Let's go. It was really fun. So yeah, I hear you. There's nothing like in person, and we just have to figure out ways to have that sometimes, because it's not going to be all the time.
Yeah, I think the hybrids for sure. The way it's not going to be all the time. Awesome. I love that. They're super easy to kind of memorize, internalize. Put that on those 5 Ps on a sticky note. Put it on your laptop. Quick mental check every day. Am I showing up this way? I really like that. All right, switching gears a little bit. This is kind of a story based podcast, and I imagine you have a ton of them. I would love to even unpack just that the win at the dinner. I think we can all remember moments like that just feel like, was this planned, or like how did the universe just like make this so perfect? But tell me about one of the more impactful stories that you've gone through in your career, and fly me back to that time period, what was going on, and we'll unpack it.
I don't know if it was a massive celebratory win, but I think for me as a woman in sales, um, when I was kind of growing up in this industry, there weren't many admirable women. to be honest, to like look up. There just weren't that there were just less of us. And so I didn't really think twice about it, to be really honest. I just kind of like did my thing and I was really good at the thing I did. And selling, meaning selling when I was selling, and then got into leadership and then didn't really, kind of did my thing and I was really good at it. And I will say, just because this is important, right? You never really get the guide to sales management, right? You just kind of like you're either the number one sales rep, or yeah, you've done the team lead thing, you've coached some people, but you just kind of get thrown into it. I think nowadays it's a little bit better, but when I was moving into sales management, it was like, we have a position. Do you want to go for it? I was like, yep, I do. And you just kind of go and you just learn on your own. And so again, I was just doing the thing that felt natural to me, as far as coaching, mentoring, and trying to keep up with numbers, or trying to like help with numbers. And so it wasn't until probably, a few years into leadership where I started to see more women in sales and more women in leadership, and they just weren't that good. It they weren't exciting me. Um they weren't this like positive hope of light, and again, admirable. They were like the opposite, right? They were so negative, or not negative, but they were so forceful with their opinion. They were so aggressive with their thoughts and their decisions. And I was like, why? Right. And this is probably two or three people. So again, like at that time, I was like, I don't want to be that person. I don't want to be that leader. And it just turned me off, like, from yeah, it turned me on to focusing actually on just becoming a really strong woman leader. Because you'll hear people say, Scott, and like, being very, very frank, like, some of my closest friends are like, I don't want to have a woman leader. I don't wanna have a woman boss, 'cause they've had bad experiences, and that's, like, awful. Like, we should not be talking about that. Gender shouldn't be a thing, right? And so, but I did experience it, and so, like, I'm empathetic when I hear that, because I was like, "Yeah, I hear you." Like, I haven't had many great women leaders myself. So that became my mission, to be I don't need to be a bitch. I don't need to be the extra loud in the room just because all the other people in the room are loud. I need to lead with compassion. I need to be focused on culture, and I need to care, right? Like, simply, I need to be a good person, and I need to be focused on the numbers and focused on the people, and do it in a great way where people are like, wow, she affected my life. I said recently, I took over a couple of different departments at Crunchbase, and I got up in front of them and I was like, look, like, I want to be one of the best leaders that you've ever had, and you can look back and be like, wow, she was great. And so I'm like, I don't know if I'm always going to be that way or always going to feel that way, but I'm going to try. I'm going to try my darnest to get there. And that, people management is tough in its own way. And then you put sales and revenue and numbers and churn and retention in there, and it's even harder. And so, yeah, so that kind of that just triggered me, really, to just want to focus on being a great people leader. And luckily, that at the forefront, I have still been able to hit numbers and be a great, like, sales and revenue generating leader as well. But I will say that I've always put the people and the culture, like, a little bit ahead of it, because I don't want to be a jerk. I don't want to be this bitch that is hitting numbers, but people are leaving and they can't stand you, and you're not helping them move up in their career. and you've done, and you don't care.
It's the harder route almost, but it's the right route. It's in our hyper competitive environment. We've all had, call it sports coaches or anyone teaching us anything. You can be the hard line thing, and maybe in short term, out of like fear, you're going to play a little bit better, or you're going to practice your instrument a little bit more, but it's a very short term bump, and then over time you're actually detracting from their overall performance. And when you do lead with compassion and empathy and take the time to understand what truly motivates them, not because it can't be one size fits all. Like you go from a wide approach and be like, okay, I'm hardlined with everyone and I'm loud, or you have to do basically tailored. And I imagine you do this like a tailored leadership style to every single one of your team members that are all vastly different human beings and are inspired and demotivated by different things, and you need to know what those are.
That's right. Yeah, it's the harder route. It's more time consuming. It's more like digging in personally, right? But it's so much more rewarding. It's so much more rewarding.
Yeah, and sustainable, and you don't have team churn, and people come together, and and it doesn't mean you can't demand excellence, right? That's where kind of sometimes these ideas, uh, people mistakenly think that's weakness, or that you're not going to be able to drive results that way, and it's just proven time and time again that's just not true. You can demand excellent and be an empathetic, compassionate leader.
In fact, I think sometimes I've received even more excellence because I've given them the ability to be their true authentic self. They've showed I've cared, and they work harder, right? And they're like, wow, they're working even that little bit more percentage and effort because they're happy.
Yeah, huge. And kudos to you for taking the hard path. You said something interesting there, which I would love your go a little bit deeper on. And I've been told this before from multiple female friends and colleagues. I can think of a particular conversation I was recently having with a female friend, and she's an incredibly talented operator, not in tech, in commercial real estate development, which is also a little bit even behind where we are in tech. So not a lot of female leadership. And she said the same thing: was all of the female leaders are like really mean to me, and they don't seem to be mean to everyone else on the team. And I don't. And she's trying to like figure out, is like, are they trying to like push me to get better? And she's having a tough time battling with that. I guess, what would you say to women who are maybe in that situation, or aspiring leaders?
I know exactly what she's referring to. It's this like competition um, of sorts. And you don't see it with the male counterparts. You don't see it with the other genders at all. And so I um I think just don't focus. I just don't worry. Just try not to focus on it would be my advice. I think just try and do the best work you can and surround yourself with people that support you and make you feel good, because that type of behavior and toxicity is it's just damaging to your leadership and your team and your results. And I know it's so easier said than done to just ignore it sometimes, but like it's not worth it, because you're gonna find somebody is gonna support her and somebody is gonna make her better in a way that feels good and not threatening or manipulative or just mean, you know? So, yeah, it's hard. I've seen that.
Interesting thing to wrestle with, and I imagine, I can guess, as we that likely that will change as we work hard to get more representation in leadership with females. Then maybe there's less like competition, less like, um, and with the rise of more leaders like yourself, compassionate, empathetic. One of the questions I want to talk about your kind of career arc and your story is, so you clearly you got to this place of learning the kind of leader you wanted to be. But when you look back at maybe your early career or before you figured out those things, where did you go wrong? Is there anything you would do differently when you look back?
How much time do you have? Of course, right? Yeah, when you reflect on things, for sure. I think um the one thing I probably would say is when you need to grow revenue, when you're in hyper growth. I've been at, that stage a few times in my career where it was like hyper growth, like all out, we got to just get to this number. Typically, that's a let's hire more, let's get more heads, let's, create the like just use humans to do it in a way. I think now I would probably, I feel like I'm just a little bit more methodical with it. I would say, can we be more efficient as a team? Can we increase efficiency as a team first before we try and hire? Because what tends to happen, and we've all been there, and we probably won't have it for a while in this environment that we're in, but is you just overhire, and now you're like, shit, what do I do? Now we're really not efficient as a team, and you start to like really look at the cost of the sale there. So, not to say that I wouldn't have hired, I probably would have just tried to say, let's get this team. Give me 1, 2, 3 months to just figure out how we can work on efficiency a bit with who we have. And then I can look at the number to hire to grow. Um, yeah. So I think it was just it was the time of like, hey, we just got to go. We got to move. And a lot of companies did that. I have done that. Yeah.
It's nice to see a bit more of I think it's a forced change, but definitely there's no more unlimited money from the VCs coming in, but it's a
But
healthy
it's a
change
healthy
for
change, and
sure.
it's still, I mean, thinking like, right, hiring and interviewing, I mean, it's the biggest non-revenue generating task that we do as sales leaders. So that, it consumes so much. So it's probably a better change.
And everyone wins with efficient growth, right? The VCs funding the companies, don't have to continue to invest more and more. The growth rate of the company is better. And also the individual
Are
reps,
doing
with
usually
less
doing
reps
better.
on a team.
Right.
Yeah,
Yeah.
exactly. Yeah. There's more, more customers to close basically,
More
for
commission to
everyone.
be made. Yeah.
Exactly, exactly. Okay, this has been awesome, and Ange, thanks for being open and candid with your story. I think it's super super important. My last two questions, I always keep them the same, and they are intentionally vague, so you can take them anywhere you want. And the first question is: there's a lot of bad advice out there. There's a lot of old tactics, old best practices still kicking around. What is one tactic or strategy that revenue leaders widely believe to be true that you think is bullshit or no longer serving us?
I think it kind of just sums up, I think, the world we're living in today, but the whole emphasis on outbounding. When you have a company that has to like completely outbound, it makes me think of a few things. It makes me think of like, is there a big product market fit? I'm not against outbounding. I just want to say that. I think there are ways to do outbounding really well. And I think we are so fortunate to have a lot of tools out there that help with it, and especially, the coming of AI. But I think when it's such a big part of the revenue, I think the lengths that we go to to close the deal or to push, like, just becomes it gets very unnatural, right? It becomes this, like, forced sale. And I don't know if that's being very clear, but I think, I don't wanna say outbounding is dead. I think outbounding needs a big change. It needs a big overhaul, and I think, again, we're we're naturally going through that now. But there has been times in my career when outbounding was like, "All right, well, then inbounding's down," right? We need to outbound, and I think you can drive a good outbounding machine, but sometimes the tactics there are just, like, is whether it's like just increasing the sequence and how many times you're reaching out to that person, whether it's surrounding this. I think it needs just a overlift. I think people are done with it. I think it's just it's a hard game to play. It's sometimes necessary for companies. I get it, but I think it just needs this whole restructuring and outlook on it.
Yeah, outbound is definitely changing, and we've had a few guests sort of mention that or allude to similar things. So I think it's a shared sentiment. But there certainly is a time and a place. There's a lot of new technologies that come out that folks need education on. Like it's almost like you don't know the problem until you've kind of seen that there's a solution. So certainly a time and a place. I think the strategies and tactics are going to differ. But almost what I'm hearing in that answer too is just a zoomed out idea that how hard is it to close a customer? And if you're like square peg, round hole, it's like we have the best go to market motion ever, and like you just force it through. It's not good for anyone. And Mark Cossaglo is the CRO at Catalyst. He can't remember exactly how he words it, but he says, "Congratulations, you just closed your closing churn. So you managed to close it, and then in a year they're going to churn, and all the money that you threw to close that customer is out the window, right? We don't usually make our payback in like the first year. It costs us too much to acquire a customer. So I think it's a good way to look at it. If it's too hard, maybe there's a reason. Maybe go back to the drawing board on the problem you're solving. Final question: what's something that's working for your team right now? Whether it's a strategy, a tactic, something that you're having success with today.
I'm trying to get my leaders of the different functions listening and involved with my whole org. So kind of just like having really a cohesive leadership team. So I want my CSM leader talking to my SDR and AE leader and making sure like we're just sharing what's going on. Maybe even getting opinions on like, what do we think of this? And so like it doesn't sound like revolutionary, but I want them to expose them to that part of the sale. I think it's great for growth. And two, I want to hear some of their ideas that we probably haven't thought of from a post-sale, opinion. So I'm also trying to bring the team really together because I kind of, like I mentioned, took on a couple of different departments and like I want to run it like one unit. And so doing that, it has really helped me and I think has helped them with the business that they're running, right? I mean, they're still very much responsible for one line of business, but when we're sitting there brainstorming about OKRs and we're sitting there and thinking through like, okay, do we want to change up our basically our onboarding calls? Well, yeah, let's start from the beginning. Like, what's the information we need at the SDR level to the AE level to what we want the CSM to get on that call? It's been kind of fun. And yeah, I just been liking the collaboration.
The more we can get, cross collaboration and other leaders outside of sales involved in the process, it's so helpful. I think that's one thing we did quite well at Outreach, at least at the enterprise and strategic level, like larger. We'd have big deal review calls with like leaders across every business unit. And the perspectives that would come and the stories and the anecdotes and like, oh, this reminds me of this customer. And then it was amazing what could happen, bringing. And we found that like a lot of the leaders, even though it wasn't their direct like maybe KPI that they were affecting, they loved it. They're like, oh, this is cool. I get to like be a big part of it. So I think that's great. Well, Ange, this has been awesome. Thanks for hanging out with me. I'm glad we made it happen. You're such a pro. Congrats on a fantastic career. And for folks who want to continue to follow along,
Find me on LinkedIn.
Perfect. Well, thanks again. And to our listeners, appreciate you. Thanks for tuning in every week. And of course, I always say it, listening's one thing, executing is something totally different. Internalize this and go apply it to your business and your career. And we'll see you next week.